Hello everyone, this is POW Ponder on Weather. In this update, we're going to be talking about a robust storm system that really means business, bringing widespread impacts and all hazards over the next several days. So we got a lot to talk about, so let's go ahead and delve into the details. We've been watching this really strong, significant trough going to be digging off the west coast here into the Four Corners regions, and out ahead of it, we got a surface low developing this afternoon into Sunday, April the 3rd time frame. And as it does, out ahead of that dry line, thunderstorms should start to erupt as we get into the early evening hours in portions of Oklahoma as well as into West Texas. In fact, the Storm Prediction Center has already highlighted a slight risk for severe storms in portions of Oklahoma City, back into Wichita Falls, Texas, Lawton, Oklahoma, as well as Edmond. But as these storms move across into portions of West Texas, and as they continue to push into the early evening hours into central Oklahoma, they will start to fade. So we do have an isolated large hail threat, damaging wind threat with these particular thunderstorms. But as they continue to push off east towards into the midnight time frame, they should start to fizzle as they get into central Oklahoma as well as into portions of North Texas, and leave all the instability out there in West Texas and around the Oklahoma City area. But as that same system continues to push across to the east, as we get into your Monday afternoon time frame, that surface low just continues to intensify, and that dry line really starts to get active again, especially right along that 5-6 o'clock time frame. So I do feel there'll be a significant cap over portions of Oklahoma into North Texas as we get into the daytime hours. But as that dry line gets active, as that upper level low feature starts to get a little bit closer, I think that cap starts to erode in a good chunk of West Texas, headed into North Texas. And we've got pretty significant updrafts with this particular system. We could be looking at all three modes of severe weather, including that large hail, that damaging wind, and a few tornadoes is definitely not out of the question with this storm system as it continues to push across. What you're looking at here is the overall updrafts of this event as we get into the early afternoon hours into the overnight hours, as I think these cells are going to be starting to form out here in West Texas, move across central Oklahoma, North Texas, into East Texas, and eventually headed into portions of Arkansas, into Louisiana, as we get into the overnight hour time frame and the wee hours of the morning. So in fact, the Storm Prediction Center has already highlighted a huge area of a slight risk for severe weather that extends all the way out here into Abilene, portions of Fort Stockton, extends all the way further south into Austin, includes the Waco area, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, portions of southern Oklahoma, as well as southern Arkansas, and then those extend into Shreveport, all the way into portions of Jackson, Mississippi, as that dry line gets active into the early afternoon hours. I think thunderstorms do start to erupt along the dry line, and unfortunately this area is going to be spinning. So there are some significant updrafts with this particular system, so you do have a 5% chance of seeing some of those isolated, even a possibly few tornadoes, especially as you get in and around portions of North Texas into portions of Shreveport area. But it can't be ruled out as far south as into San Antonio, into Austin, into Houston, as this widespread event really starts to break out along the dry line and pushes across into the early evening hours, into the early late overnight time frame. But some of these actually could be some training supercell thunderstorms as well. So the Weather Prediction Center does actually have a slight risk for excessive rainfall. This would be essentially into East Texas, into portions of southern Arkansas and northern Louisiana here, with some of those areas picking up 1 to 3 inches of rainfall with this system. So flooding is also going to be a main concern as well. But as these storms continue to push across, I do feel this is what the radar could look like about 9 o'clock Monday night time frame. I think the storms start to initiate off the dry line here into West Texas about 5-6 o'clock time frame, And as they continue to push up, and as that cap starts to erode as you get closer into Oklahoma and North Texas, I think storms become a little bit more numerous. So you might have some discrete supercells that form out ahead of this broken squall line, and those all could be looking at large hail, damaging winds, and that isolated tornado threat. But as that broken squall line moves through, you'll have very heavy rain move across portions of North Texas into Central Texas. So your timing into Central Oklahoma and to portions of North Texas, essentially about 6 o'clock in the evening time frame through midnight. And those will continue to push after midnight time frame into Arkansas, into Louisiana, as we get into your Tuesday morning time frame. With all that instability, and the shear continues to move across, and now it'll be setting up over portions of Louisiana and Mississippi by the time we get into your Tuesday, April the 5th time frame. And here's what the radar could look like about 10 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday. Those storms race across. Look how fast they have moved, going from essentially East Texas towards the midnight time frame, all the way through Louisiana, back into Mississippi. And by the time you get into Tuesday morning around 10 o'clock, they're elevated over Mississippi and to portions of Alabama, as well as into Georgia, into western Tennessee, with all three modes of severe weather on the table with this setup. In fact, even they do have a slight risk for severe weather into portions of Mobile, back into Montgomery, back into Columbus, Georgia here, back into Macon. So these areas, essentially from New Orleans all the way up into South Carolina, into the Florida Panhandle, will be under the gun on Tuesday, with widespread severe weather racing across into the afternoon hours, into the evening hours. And then you still have that flood threat as well. So that training supercell thunderstorms starts to set up shop over portions of Alabama and to Georgia and to South Carolina, where those areas could be picking up 1 to 3 inches of rain. Some isolated spots of 2 to 4 inches is not out of the question. So on top of the large hail, damaging winds, and that isolated tornado threat, you do have flash flooding would be a concern with those isolated training storms segments that will be moving across. And it does look to slow down a little bit as we get into Wednesday. So a lot of the same areas, and this storm just really starts to explode and becomes more of a comma Q shape. And down to the south in the warm sector, you got more storms. So the Storm Prediction Center has highlighted, and even a day 4 risk this far out, back into New Orleans here, all the way extending up into portions of Virginia and North Carolina here, back into South Carolina. So this whole area will be under the gun, even into portions of Kentucky by then, for all three modes of severe weather as we get into the afternoon hours. But look at the transport water vapor imagery index for Wednesday afternoon. You can see the comma cube with this massive storm really starting to take shape. There's a 993 low pressure system, and then just to the north of there, you actually got some snow flying with some colder air in the backside from this system. Look at those tight lines here. That's an indication where those tight isobars are really going to be tightened up, of where there's stronger wind gusts will be. Down to the south, you've got that southwest pull here, bringing all that transported energy from the Gulf of Mexico and dumping it inland. That's the concern for that flash flood risk. Along with all the instability in place, you're looking at all three modes for severe weather. And this is what the actual surface map looks like underneath it. You can see this massive comma Q shape of a 991 millibar low pressure as we get into your Wednesday afternoon time frame, April the 6th, and just to the north into portions of Wisconsin there, up into the upper Great Lakes, you got heavy snow flying with all that colder air pulling in the backside. And then out ahead of it, you got all that warm sector bringing all that instability and that widespread severe weather event even into Wednesday. And that just continues to shift further off into the East Coast on Thursday. Now on Thursday, we still have a slight risk for storms over portions of the Carolinas into Virginia, with that low pressure system really start to explode by then and really wrapping around here, bringing in that colder air on the backside. And these storms continue to race off into the East Coast, bringing all that heavier rain along the East Coast into the mid-Atlantic states, into the Northeast. by the time we get into your Thursday afternoon time frame and into Friday. Look at the satellite picture as this continues to race across into the east. So all that instability should be, by the time we wake up on Friday morning time frame, most of it should be starting to push offshore as you got colder air filtering in. I mean, this will be, April the 8th by then. So we're talking some pretty colder and chilly air mass on the backside for April standards as this moves through. And check out some of the low temperatures potentials by the time we get into Friday morning, April the 8th. Yeah, those are widespread 30s for a good chunk of Arkansas, Missouri, into Illinois, into Indiana, back into Tennessee, even into portions of Alabama here. So can't be ruled out. A lot of these areas could see a late season frost. So you want to be able to take care of your plants if you live in this neck of the woods. Even on the backside with that chillier air mass continue to dive and bringing that northwest flow and bringing all that colder air anomalies, pushing it further off into the southeast. In fact, from April the 8th time frame through the 12th, all that colder air and well below average temperatures will be locked over a good chunk of the southeast. So yeah, you won't be talking severe weather by then. You'll be talking some chilly conditions and well below average conditions, upwards to 15 to 20 degrees below average temperatures at times. So there's definitely some colder air to contend with on the backside, at least for April standards. So definitely be on the lookout for that as we kind of warm up in the midsection of the countries. And yes, we'll be looking at another trough, trying to set up shop by the time we get into your probably next Monday time frame off into the Pacific Northwest. But here's your overall rain over the next essentially 6-7 days. We do have that atmospheric river continue to pummel portions of the Pacific Northwest. Fairly dry out here in the deserts, much of the west coast here. But once you get into the central U.S., once it taps into some of that Gulf moisture and that storm system that's going to be racing across, it really starts to unload over portions of Oklahoma and to portions of North Texas. But those heavier rains will push into East Texas and Arkansas, Louisiana, and especially where a lot of those slight risk for excessive rainfall takes shapes into Mississippi, into Alabama, back into Georgia, and the Carolinas here. We could be looking at 2 to 4 inches over the course of the next 5 or 6 days, even some isolated spots, even upwards to 6 inches. Probably can't be ruled out with this pretty significant training cells that continue to race across, and those will actually lift up in a good chunk of the portions of the mid-Atlantic states, and they could be looking at some heavier rains as well with this particular system as it races across from west to east throughout the week. So hey, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video and definitely hit the subscribe button if you hadn't already. I am going to be updating tomorrow morning on this initial setup, and then I'll probably be going live starting about 6 o'clock on Monday evening to cover the portions of the Oklahoma and Texas severe weather impact, and I'll be doing live coverage probably through the midnight time frame that night. So that's my plan for today. So stay tuned for tomorrow's update where I protect you before and after the storm.